Okay, so we're at a point where we want to talk about color and value, and I'm going to try to fit them all into one lecture and try to keep this as succinct as possible, right? But and this is for interior designers, game art, graphic designers. We'll look at that in a minute just to see how pertinent it is in a design fundamentals class. But usually, when we're talking about this in an academic setting, well, and even in a professional setting, you want to be able to talk about why you've used color or value in a certain way. So, if you design, let's say, a room and you use a bunch of warm colors, and somebody comes up and says, "Well, why'd you use warm colors?" I mean, you could say, "Well, I just like warm colors," or you could say, "No, I wanted to create a harmonious, warm, rich environment into which then I can place some contrasting cools," right? So there's a big difference there into how you describe it. Elements and principles of design, right? Line creates you can go across from the elements to the principles here. So line can create movement, right? Shape can create rhythm. It doesn't have to go straight across here, right? Color and value can create mood, okay? Texture can create emphasis. So when you're discussing, when you're analyzing these things, a lot of times in like a discussion question or something, we'll look at a couple of images here real quick, and we'll talk about how we can analyze them. You want to come back to this. These are your building blocks. This is how you want to talk about it. Okay. So before we get into that, let's just look at why interior designers, you'd use color to create mood or an atmosphere within a space. Animators, graphic designers, the same, right? But you're going to create a sense of movement, depth, emotion, okay, depending on the color. Fashion designers, pretty much coordinating various elements within a garment. So it's all, even though you're in a 2D design fundamentals course, okay, these things are going to be pertinent to you in your area of emphasis. A lot of times you're going to have to go out and you're going to have to analyze an image. I was looking for examples. Yeah, so if I was going to analyze this in a discussion question and post it, I'd say Frida Kahlo, the artist here, is using red, right, warms, to accentuate the focal point, okay, to emphasize, okay, because we're always going back. Remember, don't let me stray too much. I always want to go back to these things here. So what's she emphasizing? What kind of mood is she creating? Is there any rhythm or movement that I should be pointing out? Okay, so obviously we have reds. Now, how do you make a red stand out? You put it over a cool. And I won't get into the whole color wheel, which I can explain pretty succinctly without going off on a tangent like so many people do with color. But basically, a warm against a cool is going to create contrast, all right? So she's creating a contrast here, and it's really emphasizing the heart even more, right? Now, as far as the cools and how they're worked within this painting, you'll notice that there's a sense of unity in this background through those same size shapes. The repetition of those shapes is creating a sense of unity. So again, I'm going back to these words here, right? Unity. Where's repetition? I don't see repetition. I should have repetition in there. I put this down as a footnote. Visual interest, harmony, and clash. So sometimes you're going to want to create clash maybe in a game. Sometimes you're going to want to create harmony, say, in a space. So just to get back to this, I would say as far as color, she's using the cools to create an environment. Definitely some desaturated cools in the background so it doesn't become too discordant. So there's more of a harmonious kind of environment with these desaturated blues coming into these richer cools and these purples, and then accented with these warms. As far as value, you can see the lighter clouds contrasting with the darker areas of the sky, creating a kind of a pattern, a repetition, and a rhythm. So there's kind of a rhythmic feel to that background, all right? Anything else? Yeah, I don't know. This isn't a great example of, say, you could go out and find some really good examples for value, like Caravaggio with chiaroscuro and that. But I mean, obviously, like the white dress here, okay, and then the darkened hair. So the values are used in this painting to create contrast. Let's look over at Let's look at this. I was just looking for some examples of, say, interior design. Very colorful, right? So how do you keep it from being discordant? What's happening here? I mean, in terms of value, I would just say, obviously the value here, the light source is creating volume. But these are three-dimensional objects as well, right? But you could have lit this scene differently. But the way this is lit with the value, with these shadows, it's accentuating the nooks and the forms of these things. And in terms of value as well, you've got the darker rug with these lighter shapes. You do have that sense of unity being created through these repeated same kinds of shapes. And then you'll notice that a lot of contrast here. Okay, there's these blues and the reddish purples and these oranges and these reds. So the warms here want to become unified. You know, the yellows relate to the reds, relate to the oranges, and yet they're kind of playfully interspersed with these cools. So what would we use to describe that? Probably balance, using color to create balance. It's about, there's a kind of a balance between the blues and the reds, right? So you can see where I'm going with this. When you're doing these assignments, you don't have to dig down deep and try to reinvent the wheel. You go back to your list of elements and principles, and it's all about putting these things together and then analyzing the thing in front of you. This is, Game Art. This was a really interesting site because it talks about how visual hierarchy, and color and value. If you lighten things up, you're creating a hierarchy. You're putting them at the top, right? The things that come out to you and call your attention. And whereas the things in the background, darker, less vibrant. So, read up on that as well. Just in terms of maybe analyzing your own work, these are some landscapes that I've been working on using, I'm using some AI to generate these landscapes. But, if I was going to describe this, obviously there's some undulating kind of same types of shapes, natural shapes that are leading the eye in and back, right, that are creating a sense of unity. Natural colors. There's a real sense of unity in the colors. There's nothing discordant jumping out. Bright reds or yellows or purples. It's all a very natural kind of look. The use of value, you've got this highlighted, backlit mountain range. So you've got the dark of the mountains coming down into the lighter foothills, and then the backdrop of the backlit, I don't know if that's a sunset maybe, or a sunrise, but that is highlighting that. So it's creating contrast back there, which would really bring your eye back to those jagged mountain shapes, which stand out against these softer kind of sandy areas in here. Same thing in here. Again, the use of value, side light, highly contrasted. So it's going to bring out the forms in this scene here. It really gives you a sense of the time of day, maybe an afternoon or an early morning, and then it's really bringing out in relief, these natural forms in here. So that's where the use of value. You've got heavy darks and lights, a lot of contrast, leading you back into these softer areas in here. So again, just to kind of bring it back home, as far as using color and value in your own images, for example, if I wanted to emphasize the river here, all right, I could saturate the water a little bit more, right? And if an art director or somebody came up behind me and said, well, what are you doing? I'd say, well, I want to accentuate the river because the river is important in this particular image for whatever reason, right? But we're creating a hierarchy. Conversely, I could desaturate it, and I can change the nature of these things using color. What about contrast or value? On some of these if we're talking about value and color, so if I wanted to change the nature of this image, I could play with the exposure. Right? I can brighten it up. I could make the contrast more extreme, make it a little bit more hard-edged if I wanted. Push the highlights a little bit more, increase the shadows, bump the whites up. And this is all maybe in my artistic vision. If I wanted to increase the texture a little bit and make it a little bit busier visually and clarity, all of this would be in my own artistic vision, and I would want to be able to rationalize this as far as like, how am I going to use value and color to make my narrative say what I want it to say. Let's click OK here. So you can see the difference here. This is a much more dramatic, more of a less inviting kind of an atmosphere. And again, it's getting much darker. The values are heavier. The colors are more pronounced. And then we have this one, which is a little bit more exotic, softer kind of a feel, right? It's so I'll just leave you with that. Always coming back to using your elements to describe your principles, using these together to create visual interest, either harmony or clash. And again, in this case, we're talking about using color and value either to create a mood, create a rhythm, find movement in a composition, or any of these. You could pick any of these, or to create unity. All right.